Hello and welcome back to my How to Start a Megabase series. Today I'll tackle the last 3 very basic things that we are missing before we can begin our journey towards legendary everything. Those things are legendary production modules, legendary speed modules and legendary beacons. All 3 items should now be very easy to get, at least in low numbers. We have already built an upcycler for legendary quality modules, so we can reuse that design with small adjustments for the next 2 modules. And we also know how to build compact and efficient item upcyclers, as we did for the EMPs on Fulgora. We can apply this knowledge to the beacons as well. I will start with production modules first, because we need them in bigger numbers than speed modules. They should start to accumulate sooner. Production modules require one very special ingredient, biter eggs. Therefore, we basically have to gamble the modules up for a long time. It won't be until much later that we will produce most of our modules directly from source materials, including legendary biter eggs. So for today's build, you will need to have access to a captured biter spawner. If you already have the specific research for this and the materials, you can place one directly close to the upcycler or close to where you import bioflux. But here's a neat tip for how to have a natural biter spawner in conveniently close proximity. When you start a new playthrough, you will encounter some early biters right next to your starting area. You can soft capture one of their nests by disabling it. If you place pipes or walls at these specific locations, the nest will no longer be able to spawn biters. It will remain peaceful unless you remove one of the pipes. You can come back many hours later with a capture rocket and capture it. Now you have a biter spawner very close to where your actual base is. Before we start building, let's quickly take a look at the design we are going to reuse. This is the quality module upcycler from the first video. It has been constantly running while I made the other videos, for a total of 50 hours. This is also the version without legendary EMPs yet. Let me highlight a few things that became apparent after these 50 hours. First, we can see that 2 machines for green quality appear to be a bit too slow. We accumulated around 200 superconductors. Would I therefore build a 3rd machine? No, because 200 superconductors divided by 50 hours gives just 4 superconductors per hour. So a 3rd machine would run only once every 15 minutes, which is not worth it. Also, in a real playthrough, I would have already replaced these 2 normal quality machines with a single legendary one. And one legendary machine is 25% faster than these 2 machines together. I simply would not have this backlog. Next, let's have a look at the buffer chest for blue quality modules. We can see that the ingredients we got from recycling are totally out of proportion. We are missing a great number of superconductors. Unfortunately, that's perfectly normal. In theory, we should get 25% of all material back. But items like superconductors that have a return probability of 0 to 1 will almost always run short over time. This is why we need buffer chests. And this will also deadlock any upcycler, given enough time has passed. And lastly, I want to point out that with each iteration of a design like this, I find new things that can be improved, even if they're only very minor. For example here, if I set a filter condition for legendary quality on this inserter, I can also move the other inserter here. Now I can save one splitter and the design becomes even simpler. So feel free to improve on this design in your playthroughs. It is by no means perfect. For today's production module upcycler, I will reuse only parts of this build because I think that at this point in the playthrough, I already have access to legendary EMPs. If you've been following this series in order, you should also have access to those. If not, you will need to make some small adjustments, which I'll also explain. For this design, you will need either 6 legendary EMPs and 64 legendary quality modules, or 14 more non-legendary EMPs and 104 legendary quality modules. I start the design by placing down 5 legendary EMPs and set their recipe to normal quality production modules. If you don't have legendary EMPs, you will need to use 12 normal quality EMPs instead. And of course, all EMPs will need quality modules. I add 2 belts for the inputs and a 3rd belt for the output. I also add inserters and a memory cell for the output inserters. This memory cell is of course completely optional. Now let's continue with the inputs. Although I could copy and paste this from the other design, I will instead quickly go through it again for any new viewers to the channel. I placed 2 normal quality EMPs for the Tier 2 modules. Each machine gets 4 speed modules with 3 speed beacons in between, bringing them to the required production rate of 1 module per second. Below those, I add 2 additional EMPs for the Tier 1 modules. Here I need even more speed modules and beacons. Now I can connect the input bells, which I have already prepared on the right. Green circuits are only needed down here. Red and blue circuits are needed at the top and at the bottom. Finally, I add an output belt for the Tier 2 modules here and bring it over to the main production array. Now we are only missing the biter X, and this is where I deviate from the previous design. Remember how we had an inserter fill a belt with superconductors in the previous design? Well, I want to avoid having a belt filled with biter X, because they tend to hatch and cause trouble. Instead, I want to add a simple way to limit them. So let's create a loop and bring the biter X back to the start. By placing this first underground belt, we can make sure that only the bottom lane of the belt is being returned, which contains the biter X. Now we can add a requester chest and an inserter. I limit the stack size of the inserter to 1. Then I connect the inserter to both the ingoing and the returning belt with a wire and configure both belt segments to read belt contents with a mode set to hold all belts. Finally, I configure the inserter to only be active if there are less than 10 biter X on the belts. Now I can safely request some biter X, let's say 20. You can see that the inserter will now only put biter X onto the belt if there are less than 10 in total present. One tip for the number of biter X that you should request in this chest. It depends on how far away your captured biter spawner is. If it's close by, you can even reduce this number. But if your bots have to travel all across Nauvis, you might have to increase it instead. In general, request as few biter X as possible. And as a second tip, this is how you can safely provide biter X from your captured biter spawner. First, you need a requester chest to feed the spawner. So let's request some bioflocs, for example 20. Enable trash unrequested to get rid of any spoilage. Next, you need 1 yellow logistic chest for the biter X. Make sure to set its logistic filter so any obsolete X will be returned here and not become a surprise in some random chest. The inserter needs to filter for biter X and also be connected to the logistic network to limit the amount of biter X you pull out of the nest, for example 20. And then you need to make sure to remove any spoilage from the nest, because the bioflocs will occasionally spoil. And finally, a few laser turrets should suppress any uprisings. But now let's continue with our design. As you can see, the normal quality modules are now being produced, so let's add the recyclers. We need a total of 6, all of which get quality modules. Before we connect the belt, we need to remember to filter out any legendary modules. And as a safeguard, I would also configure the recyclers inserters to exclude legendary quality, so I don't accidentally destroy my legendary modules. The output of the recyclers will go onto a belt at the top. Let's first filter any normal quality items to the right and sort them back into their respective input belts with some splitters and inserters. All items of better quality will take a turn to the left and be transported here. This is where I deviate again from the previous design. Instead of 2 normal quality EMPs, I will use 1 legendary EMP for the green quality modules. I filter all green items here and add a buffer chest as well. I speed hack the inserter with the read belt contents and set filters trick, so it is fast enough to pick up all incoming items. If you don't have legendary EMPs, you need to change this to 2 normal quality EMPs that share a buffer chest. I repeat this for blue quality next. From here on, normal quality EMPs will be fast enough. For the remaining 2 qualities, I don't need another splitter. I can instead use my improved setup and filter them into separate buffer chests with inserters. The chests will then feed into the final 2 EMPs we need. And remember, this very last EMP does not need any quality modules. Now let's add storage chests for all 5 different qualities of production modules. Since I want to recycle all lower qualities, I put them next to the recycling belt and add inserters. The legendary modules can go here. And since this design will produce approximately 26 legendary modules per hour, I'll add an info panel as a reminder. To finish things off, let's add a few laser turrets, because every now and then some biters will hatch. The turrets fit nicely between my power poles, so I'll add them there. And this is our first design done. By the way, this is the only upcycler that I will let continuously run, because I can always use a slow trickle of freshly minted production modules. This is the same upcycler in one of my recent playthroughs, although I built it a bit different. It has been running for over 100 hours non-stop. Thanks to my memory cells, I can see that it produced a total of 3,117 legendary production modules, which is still 37% of all modules produced. I'll explain in a later video how you can efficiently get legendary biter eggs. As for now, let's continue with our next item, legendary speed modules. For this, we can copy the design that we have just built on Nauvis and paste it here on Vulcanus. Then we only need to change the recipes and filters accordingly. We can also get rid of this return bell that we used for the biter eggs. So this design should be built in just a few minutes. It will, however, only run for a limited amount of time. Remember that we already have access to nearly unlimited amounts of legendary tungsten carbide. Soon we can use this carbide to produce legendary speed modules directly. But until then, it will be very helpful to get some modules by upcycling, because we need as much speed as possible in our upcoming step. Get large amounts of all legendary resources. Speaking of speed, the last thing we need is legendary beacons. So let's also add a very simple upcycler for those. Luckily, beacons can be produced with EMPs and benefit from the inbuilt 50% productivity bonus. This makes the upcycling process very efficient. So let's put down 5 EMPs and set the recipes for all 5 qualities. If you want to speed this up, you can replace this first normal quality EMP with a legendary quality one, or add a second EMP for normal quality. As usual, the outputs will go on a belt and be transported down. The recycler comes next with an inserter filtering for purple quality or lower. By the way, a few viewers pointed out that I could simply blacklist legendary quality instead. They're absolutely right, but I really can't stand the way the blacklist icon looks on the inserter. So I prefer using a whitelist. If you like the blacklist approach better, feel free to use that instead. The recycler output can go directly onto a belt because the throughput is quite low. Let's bring it up and filter it to the EMPs. First, let's add buffer chests. For the normal quality beacons, I will use a logistic chest this time, because we don't need that many items per second, and our bots will be able to deliver them. You can set the requests by shift right clicking the EMP and then shift left clicking the requester chest. This will automatically request a reasonable amount of all required ingredients. Now I can add filter splitters and sort the recycler output accordingly. This design is now complete and should spit out a few legendary beacons per hour to help us start with our next step. You can, of course, let this upcycler run indefinitely to supplement your beacon production. And you can also scale this up if you want. But since you will need thousands and thousands of legendary beacons for a megabase, it will be way faster to later produce them directly from legendary ingredients, which we will start grinding in my next video. You can find the blueprints of today's designs in the video description. If you like this content, please leave a like and hit subscribe. Thanks and bye!